Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about effectively lowering high alkalinity. This is a problem, and it can be difficult sometimes to get the alkalinity below 100. And I'll go over some steps if you're having problems with alkalinity of, say, 200, 180, even 250, and ways to lower that effectively in a pool. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. One of the first things that you need to know about alkalinity is that it's tied to the pH. Now, it's not tied directly to the pH in any kind of chemical way. The alkalinity is actually, the alkaline of the water is actually the buffer of the pH in the water. So for example, if the alkalinity was at 80 and you add muriatic acid to the pool, the muriatic acid is going to be much more effective because the pH is not buffering the water as much. If the alkalinity is at 200 and you added, a quart of acid to the pool, let's say, then that acid is going to have very little effect on the pool because it's being buffered by the high alkalinity. I think a really good example of this in nature is if you have a hillside with a lot of foliage, you have trees, bushes on that hillside. The trees and the bushes and the grass and the weeds act as a buffer to the erosion of that hill. So let's say there's a fire in the area and it burns that hill, and so you no longer have any foliage there. There's no longer any buffer, so when it rains, all that hill is going to wash away. You're going to have flooding, mudslides, because there's nothing really holding the hillside up. The more vegetation, the more trees that are there, the stronger the buffer that's there for soil erosion. And so if it rains really hard and you have it full and it's green, it's not going to erode. You're not going to have major landslides. But if it's just burned bushes or just dirt itself, you're going to have a major landslide when it rains. And so kind of get that in your head. And that's how the alkalinity works in a pool. Having really high alkalinity, you have a really strong buffer, which means that when you add the acids to the pool, really nothing's going to happen. So if you have a rainstorm, very little mud or water is going to roll down the hillside because it's going to be absorbed by the natural buffer, which is the foliage in that area or on that hillside. If you have low alkalinity, that means that there's really nothing on that hillside. And so when it rains, all that water and all that mud is going to wash the hillside away. The same thing with the pool. With really low alkalinity at 80 or 70, when you add muriatic acid, the acid is going to be really powerful in that pool because you don't have the alkalinity buffering that water, and the pH is going to drop down rapidly. So that's one caution I would say if you have really low alkalinity, if you have your alkalinity at 80, which is ideal, I think, in most cases, you want to keep in mind that adding a quart of muriatic acid when the alkalinity is at 80 has a much greater effect than adding a quart of acid when the alkalinity is at 180. So the reason you want to keep the alkalinity low, again, based on this example, is that you want the acid that you add to be effective, because muriatic acid is extremely expensive now. It wasn't expensive 5 years ago, but things are different, and it's really expensive to add tons of acids to the pool because you have such a strong buffer in the water with high alkalinity. And you want to bring that down for that reason. You want to make sure that the muriatic acid you add is going to effectively lower the pH. One other side effect of having really high alkalinity is that the pH will bounce up rapidly. So when you have low alkalinity, again, the hillside example is a pretty good visual. If you had a hillside full of foliage and trees, you had a really big storm, let's say you had 2 inches of water, which is like adding half a gallon of muriatic acid, and you had all the hillside with foliage, all that water would be absorbed, and then quickly the ground would dry out because the water is being absorbed by all the plants. And the same thing when you have alkalinity at 180 or 200, when you add half a gallon of that muriatic acid, the water has a strong buffer in there, a lot of alkaline in there, and so it will neutralize the pH or the acid you add very rapidly, so that half a gallon of acid does not lower the alkalinity down as much as you think it would, because again, they're tied together. When you lower the pH, you lower the alkalinity, but if the alkalinity is at 200 and you add the half a gallon of acid to the pool, it's going to have very little effect on the alkalinity because of the foliage on the hillside example, and therefore the pH is going to bounce right back up. So you may think that you're lowering the pH in that pool from 8 to 7.4, 7.6, and it may lower it for a moment, but then it's going to bounce back up to 8 again because the acid has basically been neutralized at that point. So with that in mind, you're wondering, well, how do I lower the alkalinity then if I'm adding acid and it's being neutralized and the alkalinity is ticking down barely because of that? Now, when the alkalinity is really low in the pool and you add the acid, of course the alkalinity drops even lower. So in some cases, if you're at 80 and you add too much muriatic acid, you can really lower that alkalinity down to 50 or 40 pretty rapidly in that case because there's no buffer. And again, the hillside is eroding rapidly because there's nothing holding it up. Same thing with low alkalinity. There's nothing really holding that pool water from getting or keeping that pool water from becoming very acidic, and keep that in mind as well. So you can easily raise the alkalinity with baking soda. Baking soda has very little effect on the pH, and it has a pretty large effect on the alkalinity. So you can counter really low alkalinity easy with baking soda. So if it does drop to 40, you can bring it back up to 80 without really affecting the pH in the pool dramatically. It's a pretty complicated process bringing the alkalinity down from say 240 to 80. And I'll use that as an example because I had a pool that actually was at about 240. It was actually a new build, and whoever took this pool on just ignored it and didn't take care of the pool, and the alkalinity really got crazy. And when I took over, it was about 240. And you may think, well, how in the world can you lower the alkalinity? Again, the acid is highly ineffective because at that level it's neutralized very rapidly. But it is effective in a way, and it does lower the alkalinity over time. And in a short period of time, you can do this effectively. Now, there are some cautions of adding too much acid to the pool. And I would caution you not to do this, to add too much acid to the pool at one time, because it can cause problems with the pool if the pH drops too low in the pool for a period of time. What I suggest, and this is kind of like an old rule of thumb, and this has been like an industry thing for a long time, is like never add more than half a gallon of 31.45% strength muriatic acid. Now, acid is all different strengths out there. If you get your acid at the pool store, if you get Hasa muriatic acid, you're going to get 31.45% muriatic acid, which is a really strong concentration of the muriatic acid. If you're getting maybe the acid at Home Depot, you're going to get maybe 14%, sometimes 12%. And this is a big factor too, because a lot of people are adding the Home Depot acid to the pool, and they're like wondering, well, why isn't the alkalinity going down? And the pH is not going down because the acid is not strong enough. You really need that 31.45% muriatic acid to lower the pH in the pool and lower the alkalinity effectively. I don't have a really effective way to give you an analogy on the strength of acid, but I think it'd be like if you had a Coke and you just put ice in it and you started drinking it the first couple minutes, that Coke is going to taste like Coke. But if you wait 10 minutes, you're going to have it watered down and it's going to take less like Coke. After 30 minutes, it's going to taste more like a watered down soda, not much there except water and a little bit of sugar. And this is kind of how the acid strength is. It's really a huge difference. 31.45 doesn't seem like much different from 17 or 14% acid, but it is or 15% I should say, because that's usually the store strength is 15%, but it is a giant difference. It's like drinking a soda after half an hour with ice in it. You're going to taste a big difference, and you're going to see a big difference in the pool adding really low cost acid, or I should say low strength acid. It's going to be probably a similar cost, but it's going to be weaker in strength, the ones you get at Home Depot or Lowe's. And then there's the dry acid, sodium bisulfate. Now, dry acid is effective in lowering the pH, but if you read the label carefully, it says that you're going to need more of the dry acid when the alkalinity is higher. And it says specifically to lower the alkalinity with muriatic acid first, and then you can switch over to the dry acid once the alkalinity is in range, because you're going to need a lot more of the dry acid to lower the pH down if the alkalinity is high. So even if you're trying a different alternative to muriatic acid, even magic acid would be something that you would need larger amounts of because of the high alkalinity. So how do you lower the alkalinity down? It's a process over a few days, and it's something that can be done. So basically, you're going to treat this as an extra stop every day of the week for you on your route. If you're able to go twice a day, it's better, but once a day you can effectively do this, and I've done it by going once a day. You'll add the acid to the pool, and if you're a homeowner and you could do this, you can probably do it over the course of a day or two. So I would add the acid, and I would add an amount of acid that's a little higher than necessary to lower the pH to a certain point. So let's say the pH is at 8, you want to bring it down to 7.6. I would add enough acid to bring it down to 7. So you're bringing it down to 7, and then at that point you want to aerate the pool. And aeration raises the pH without raising the alkalinity. And you may want to keep the aeration going so that the pH is like 8.4, and that way you're not going to have any negative effects as you're lowering down the pH in the pool to a level to where it's not going to cause staining or any kind of metal bleeding out of the heat exchanger by having the pH at like 6.5 or something for a period of time. So the higher the pH, the better in this case when you're doing this treatment. And the alkalinity will drop down, of course, because as you're adding muriatic acid, it does drop the alkalinity in the pool. So have the aeration going, which is the water features. If there's a waterfall or maybe a shear descent, have that running all the time while you're doing this process. If the pool doesn't have a water feature, you can put it in spa return mode and have the spa jets going while the pool is running. So instead of having the pool return, have the spa return, and that creates a lot of aeration in the spa, and that will, of course, raise the pH as well. You can also get a submersible pump and put it on the first step of the pool with the discharge pointed up so that it'll shoot water in the pool, and you have the pool kind of arching like a water feature effect. And that causes aeration. Basically, the aeration, you can also get the return jets and turn them to the surface, causing the bubble effect. The aeration will raise the pH without raising the alkalinity, and that's how you get the pH to go back up rapidly so that you're not dropping the pH too low. And so you want to do this every 3 hours is ideal, and this will lower the alkalinity pretty rapidly. But if you can only go there one day during the week, it may take a whole week to do this. You may want the homeowner to add acid also. This is kind of dangerous sometimes because the homeowner can splash it somewhere. I just wouldn't probably do this, but if you have a homeowner you can trust, do it yourself kind of person that you're not worried about, of course have them help you with the process. But basically going back there every day, adding the acid, aerating the pool to raise the pH. As you're adding that muriatic acid, the alkalinity is being affected. So it'll go from 240 to 220 to 200 to 180 to 160 to 120 to 100. And over the course of that week, you adding the muriatic acid, aerating the pool to raise the pH up, will have the alkalinity drop down to a certain level. Now you can do a partial drain sometimes, and this will help speed things up. But if the water is really alkaline coming out of the tap, it's not as effective. But if the alkalinity out of the tap is 100, let's say, you can effectively fast forward this process or speed it up by draining some of the water and then filling it with new fresh fill water. I find that the aeration method, adding the acid. Now, if you don't have one day, every day, a week to spare here, this process will work over the course of a month as well. You're just going to have to be very conscious about adding muriatic acid to the pool and then having the aeration bring the pH back up. And this is something that will definitely work. And this is the only really effective way of bringing down the alkalinity without really damaging the pool or adding too much acid to bring the pH down below 7, which can be, again, dangerous to the pool surface and, of course, very toxic to anyone swimming in the pool with pH of 6.8, let's say. And that's really the basic formula. Keep adding muriatic acid. Don't overdo it to where if you look at the chart and you're going to add enough acid to bring it to 6.5 on the pH, it's too risky. I would say I would drop it down to about 7 at the most. 7's still pretty safe. And then I would, of course, use the aeration to raise the pH without raising the alkalinity. Keep adding the acid, keep raising the pH, keep adding the acid, and then you're going to eventually have the alkalinity down to about 80 to 100, and that's where you want to keep it. Once it's down to that level, it's fairly easy to keep it from going back up to 200 or 240 because you're going to be adding the muriatic acid on a regular basis to keep the alkalinity low. Now, once you have the alkalinity at 80, I suggest doing this one step. And this step is really effective, and that's adding borates to the pool to bring the borate level to 50 parts per million. Borates will be another buffer to the pH, and therefore, when you're doing that, the pH is not going to rise as rapidly in the pool with the borates in there, and it's going to allow you to balance the pool much easier. Now, you don't need to do this. It's not something that's necessary, but I found that a pool with borates in it, especially if there's a saltwater generator and the pH is always on the high side, having the borates in there keeps you from having to add too much muriatic acid, and the alkalinity is much stabler in a pool with borates because you have another buffer in there helping with keeping the pH from going too high in the pool. It's a great extra step and a kind of an insurance policy against those pools that have really high pH in them, and this is something to keep in mind. And of course, it'll keep the alkalinity stable because the pH is not going to be bouncing up really high. You have to add more acid, of course, to lower the pH down because the borates, again, are another buffer in the pool. But I find it to be really effective. Alkalinity at 80, borates at 50 parts per million, and the pH tends to stay very stable in that pool, and you don't really have the problem of the alkalinity going to 150, 200, 250 in the pool when you have it balanced and you keep the alkalinity, and you make a conscious effort to keep the alkalinity low in that pool. So how much acid, or how much does the alkalinity drop, I should say, using 31.45% muriatic acid? Everything is off of a 10,000 gallon pool, and that's kind of like the industry standard. I asked one time, like, where did this 10,000 gallon come from? And it's just something that people picked up, and you have to have some kind of baseline of this. And basically, typically for every 1.6 quarts of muriatic acid that you add to a pool, it'll drop the alkalinity by 10 parts per million. So basically, every gallon of 31.45% muriatic acid will drop the alkalinity by 30 to 40 parts per million, depending. There's a few other factors in there. Let's just say 30 parts per million for every gallon. So if you're at 240 in the alkalinity, you're going to need a lot of acid to bring this down. Of course, add it over a period of time, again, that I mentioned with aeration to bring the pH up so you don't get to a level below 7.0 on the pH. You want to make sure you keep that in your mind and don't do that. So, of course, if every gallon will drop it by 30 parts per million, let's say, just to keep things easy, you would need about 5.5 gallons, or 5 gallons, let's say, muriatic acid to drop it from 240 to 80. That's, I did the math, it's 160 parts per million you want to reduce it by, divided by 30 parts per million, and that gives you 5 gallons of muriatic acid. At 31.45 strength, by the way, it's not the 15% strength you would get at Home Depot. You would have to double that and use 10 gallons of that. So you can see there's a lot of acid that's necessary to drop the alkalinity down, and it's almost mind-boggling. 5 gallons of muriatic acid in the pool, it's really incredible. Now, there's a few things that people may try to do to shortcut this, and I want to discourage you from doing this because it's very difficult sometimes to do this correctly unless you're an expert at it. Now, the pool builder can do this because they do this all the time, and it's called a zero alkalinity. Why would they do a zero alkalinity? They do this sometimes as a wet acid wash. Sometimes after the pool build, there's some kind of modeling in the pool, or maybe there's some discoloration in the color plaster, and they want to correct this with a zero alkalinity. How do they do a zero alkalinity? Well, you get a submersible pump and you suspend it over the pool with a rope, and then you add enough muriatic acid to the pool to zero out the alkalinity. Of course, the equipment is off at this point, and the pH is going to be down to a level that sometimes you can't even read. And by adding, let's say you're adding, well, for this example here, if the alkalinity is at 240 and you wanted to bring it to zero, you would add 8 gallons of muriatic acid, 31.45 strength, and then you would just turn the pool off, and the alkalinity would, of course, zero out, and then you would bring the alkalinity back up gradually with baking soda. You would bring the pH up with soda ash. It's really a complicated process, and I don't recommend you try doing this unless you've done this many times, and it's not something that I would recommend with high alkalinity because you can easily bring it down with aeration and adding muriatic acid to the pool, and it's a much safer process. And then there's one last kind of old wives' tale or myth in the pool industry that if you pour the acid in the deep end and leave the pool off for half an hour, and let it settle, it's going to lower the alkalinity more rapidly than if you were to dilute the acid and pour it around the perimeter of the pool. This, of course, is a myth. You're not going to lower the alkalinity any faster in the pool. How you put the muriatic acid into the pool, it's the same element being added. It's just like if you're adding sugar to your tea, how you add it doesn't mean that you're going to have more of a sugary taste. If you add it all and don't stir it, of course at the bottom you're going to have a lot of sugar, but the scientific principle is not really any different. If you add the sugar rapidly and stir it up, it's the same as adding a little bit of sugar every 20 seconds and stirring it. There's not going to be any difference in how sugary that iced tea is. And the same goes with the pool. There's really not an effect on the alkalinity. It's just one of those myths that has been propagated in the industry. And I see a lot of people, I think there's people that still put videos up occasionally saying that this will effectively rapidly lower the alkalinity down. It's just not the case. Of course, it's safer to add muriatic acid in the deep end than the shallow end, but it's not going to have really any effect, or the effect that you're thinking is going to have on the alkalinity. The only way to do this, of course, is to add muriatic acid, bring the pH to 7.0, and then aerate the pool to bring the pH back up. Repeat the process until you drop the alkalinity down, and you will drop it down effectively over time, roughly 30 parts per million every time you do this process, until you're down to, again, 80 would be the ideal. 80 to 100 is where you're shooting for. Looking for other podcasts I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingprolearning.com. Just click on the podcast icon on the banner, and there'll be over 1,500 podcasts for you to listen to there. And if you're interested in my coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.